Hello everyone and welcome back to Old Soul Podcast. My name is Bree, that's spelled B-R-E-I, thank you so much. Today I wanted to talk about a film called Exhuma. And this is a South Korean film with a runtime of 2 hours and 14 minutes, and it was released in the year 2024. The director of this film is named Jang Jae-hyun. And then I'll write the Korean name of Exhuma somewhere. It looks like Pamyo, the original title. Of course, there's probably going to be mistakes made with names just because of my pronunciation and the language barrier. But otherwise, I watched this film with subtitles, and it is definitely something that I would consider a horror film, not so much a psychological thriller. And I knew that going into this film that it was going to be more of a horror film. Now, while the film does get kind of graphic, it doesn't feel like, I don't know. I guess it just depends, because there's like a major spiritual aspect in this film. And to start summarizing and explaining what happens in this film, there is a very rich family, and the firstborns have like this curse over them. And this curse is, or whatever you want to call it, I'm just using curse as sort of an explanation of all the terror that they're going through. But basically they can like hear screaming, and it's like they're being haunted, and they assume that the ghost or the thing that is haunting them and causing all this stress to the family, but mostly the firstborns, is the grandfather or like the great grandfather of the family. I can't remember if he's just a grandfather or if he's a great grandfather, but either way, he's one of their distant relatives. It's a little out there. I will say, if you're watching this and you don't really like spiritual horrors and you aren't really interested in different religions, you probably won't like this film. So yeah, and this really rich family that has family that lives in South Korea, but also a lot of their family lives in America, which you see a lot of the language changes throughout the film. Not a lot of it, but it's there often enough. And there's this sort of distancing and this subtle way that the film will throw in different languages and assumptions. And I feel like it's a little bit of foreshadowing, but in my opinion, the rich family, obviously being South Korean and from South Korea, but a lot of the family, and getting into this generation of the son who actually reached out to this shaman for help about this curse, he's actually Korean American, which means he was born in America, but he's South Korean. So there's that sort of distancing from your roots in a way, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I just think that the way that the film decides to really grip into that, and how the family clearly has their secrets, they don't seem to be telling the shaman everything. And on one hand, they're honest enough, but they do seem like they're judging the shaman, like, are you a fake, are you a scam? But also, like, they're judging the shaman, but they still need her help just in case she's not a fake. I think that's so funny. And also, they're super desperate because I'm sure, like, they don't want any of this getting out and all this stuff. But also the cultural differences that come up, again, why I think this cultural aspect and this geographical regional thing happening all over the film is that the roots of the film have delved into this ideal of having a proper burial site, and, you know, paying your respects to your family members, and having the best soil plot, specifically probably for a different social class. And there's this like group of these two men, and there's a specific term for them, but I can't recall what it was. But basically, I think they kind of work with funeral homes and they like know the whole process of like, okay, this is how you bury a body, all of that. But also they take it a step further with like, oh, if you want your ancestors to be at peace, it has to have the grave has to be marked, and you want the best land with this longitude and latitude, and the soil has to be perfect. And these two men actually in the film, they do admit that they do somewhat scam these rich people. They'll say, oh yeah, you have the best plot ever, and like 90% best or something, or 100%. And then like when the family's gone, when they're talking to each other, they're like, oh, it's more like 65%. So there's that, but there's still some real cultural aspects of these families respecting these men's opinions, almost because of the fear of maybe like bad luck, or the fear of getting haunted by their family members, or just their genuine, love for the family members and not wanting them to not be at peace and at rest as they're dead. And these two men, even with their flaws, you can see the care that they take in the actual like end of life. They do have a lot of knowledge about all this stuff that surrounds being a shaman and what that means. And personally, because I don't know much about it, I don't know, like, our main character, who there's like a shaman, and then her assistant, he's a guy, and he clearly has some sort of power, and there are some other shaman that come in their group, and they all have varying levels of what I guess you could call a gift, but some people might call a nightmare, because it's all spiritual. And her main guy, he can be possessed, and he's super used to that, and they basically have formed a bond through their trauma and their gifts, or not gifts, who knows, I guess it depends on the person. And then you have those two men who, can spot the best soil, blah, 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 but they're still very knowledgeable, even despite some of the scamming that they do and the lies that they tell. And for the shaman within the film, it seemed like she was pretty professional and she knew her stuff. There's several times where you can tell that she's talking to her dead grandmother, who seems to always be a presence. And so maybe it's insinuating that clearly she can see ghosts, which does happen in the film, and the other characters tend to see those ghosts too. But I think her gift is really strong with that, and she can sense certain auras or whatever. But ultimately, right off the bat, there's a lot of bad luck going on in this family. They get to this grave. The family wants to, they don't really want to rebury their grandfather or great-grandfather. They just want to cremate it and dig up the body and cremate it and be done with it, and let's get rid of this curse. The man who reaches out to the shaman and these two men who are experts in burials and plots and all that stuff, he also has a son, and we find out later that he's tried to have several kids and they've always died, and now his son's in the hospital and sick, and he's just like, you can tell he's exhausted. And his wife is really worried, and his grandmother or great-grandmother, I can't remember if it's great or not, but when I say grandmother, just know that it's that older, more wiser being, so on and so forth. She is clearly hiding certain things. And maybe there are certain things she doesn't know, but they're not telling the shamans everything, but then they're like super judgy, but then they're also desperate, like I said before, and they need them. And the shamans are sort of like, whatever, just pay us. But then as things keep going, they're like, this isn't good. So when they get to the burial site, there's just bad vibes, right? It's bad enough that I recall one of the burial guys literally being like, I can't do this. Like, he's gonna back out. He's like, this isn't, the grave is unmarked, the condition it's in. He's almost like, you guys have all this money, why did this happen? Like, it's suspicious. Like, even if they weren't super rich, which they are, which is why it's extra, and even if they didn't live mostly in America, they're still rich enough that, like, you couldn't just pay someone to take care of this. It's just super suspicious. It looks more like someone's trying to hide something, like someone killed someone and they're trying to hide it, and less like, oh, my grandfather was buried here. It's so sketchy. So it's a bad sign all over. And they have this whole team come in to dig up the grave. They have a whole like ritual to make sure there's nothing, no essence lingering. And that would have worked if two things hadn't happened. One, there's like this, well, first let me start with some of the bad signs. The foxes lingering, apparently that's like a bad omen or bad luck. And I will say the film is great, but sometimes the CGI made me question. And the only reason why I kind of ignored some of the awkward, just kind of bad CGI, the reason why it was easy to ignore is because the film gets so deeply into the spiritual horror genre that it kind of sort of works, and I don't know if it was intentional or not, so I'm not gonna shit on it, but I didn't love it. So the foxes don't look super realistic, but they do look creepy, and I think that's the intention. And then there's this snake later after they've gotten the body out and they've decided to go through with it, and they're taking it to a funeral home because they're going to finish the burial the next day because it starts raining. Another bad sign. Oh my God. And then one of the workers who's like, they dug up the body. Now they're putting the dirt back. He like hits the snake, but the snake has like a head. It looks like a real head, like a real person's head, but kind of horror ghost spirit type of head. And it just looks really awkward. But anyway, he like kills it. And I think mostly he was scared and in shock. But later we find out that was bad because it's like bad luck later. And that guy ends up getting like really sick and kind of goes insane. It's just wild. And then once they get the shaman and her buddy, and then the main burial guy and his buddy, and then the rich people are somewhat happy, but they're a little on edge because they're like, oh, something bad gonna happen, because they're still super suspicious of everything, but they're ready to just get the body cremated. And it's just, they're just gonna hold everything. It's raining, whatever. It's, are we gonna bury the body and try this and do it the right way? We're gonna cremate it. The family's just being really flip-floppy. They're just being super flip-floppy. And it's making everyone else like, why? What are we doing? What are we doing? Why are we doing this? I should have backed out and left. But he didn't. They didn't leave. And so we get to this funeral home. They apparently trust these guys. And when I say they, I mean the burial guys trust this funeral home. But they shouldn't have, because like the main guy, as soon as everyone leaves or he thinks everyone's left, he goes into I don't know if it's cremation room, examination room. I don't really know what it's called. But he goes in there and he like tries to prop open the freaking tomb. Like he is it a tomb? He tries to break it open, and by the way, it's not sealed. I mean, it's pretty sealed, but it's just like old wood. They spent a lot of time trying to make sure no spiritual thing or being crept out of it, whatever. And this guy goes and he's trying to like open it so he can see if there's something to steal, I suppose. And then whatever he lets out goes out, and it's the spirit of the grandfather that's been haunting the family from the grave, okay? And the first thing he does is he tries to get revenge on his family members. So he kills his son, who by this time is like he's like an old man. His son's an old man who happens to live in one of the houses that this family owns. He kills him, and that's sad. And didn't like seeing that at all. And then he goes downstairs and kills another family member. And then he goes to what would be his grandson, who's like the adult who called the shaman, the guy, whatever. And he manages to trick him into getting in the house. You notice this thing of like, oh, just open the window, just open this. And like clearly has to somewhat be let into the space. And once he gets in, it's just terrible. There's a really interesting scene of him being on the phone with someone he thinks he can trust. He thinks he's talking to the burial guys. And by this time, the burial guys and the shamans are freaking out because they caught the guy who opened the freaking grave, the tomb, whatever it's called, the casket. And they're freaking out and they're trying to get a hold of the family, and no one's picking up, and the guy's not picking up, and they're rushing to figure out, they're calling the guy's assistant and trying to figure out where he is and all this stuff. And there's a parallel to him being on the phone with who we assume is the burial guy, but really it's the spirit. And like, how the hell is the spirit so smart that he's talking to the guy on the phone? Like, this is some crazy shit, okay? This is like next level horror. And then he manages to get in and he basically kills him. Spoiler, there's always spoilers in my commentaries. unless it's a new release series or a trailer series. And anyway, that was super creepy, and the way that he dies too. And then something hits me. Why is there almost always mention of Japan? So I'm talking about all the cultural stuff. We have the differences in generations. They believe all this older religious shaman stuff. I don't believe what I can't see. Do you believe now that you can see? All of this stuff happening. There's so many layers. I wish, like, I could do an essay. I could do a dissertation on this film. It's just, there's so much. When we keep going, the thing that is just crazy is that there's a connection to the grandfather working with the Japanese, okay? And so when I was watching it, and I will have to watch it again to really grasp this, so excuse me if I didn't understand it fully, and also I'm like watching the film but also reading at the same time because I watched this with subtitles. But it seems that the grandfather was indeed a traitor, because by the time, back then when he was alive, he working with the Japanese, Japan and Korea have really dark history. There's a lot of bad blood there. But to find out that the grandfather basically was helping, was he like a spy? I mean, they get into all the things that he was doing in a way, but I just kind of got confused by a lot of it. And like, were they traitors? Were they spies? What was that like? And even as I watched it, I kind of cringed. I was like, oh, this is getting really dark. Like, oh, fuck. We're talking about the war? Okay. And then, so there's all that. The ghost successfully kills almost all the family members. The ghost does not get the baby, thank God. The shaman and the burial guys were able to stop him before he could do that, but not without a lot of work and a lot of sacrifice. And so when we talk about sacrifice, there's a lot, and I mean a lot of connection to animals, but there was just a lot of like chickens and cow's blood. And most of the time you're like, oh yeah, they're already dead, or they just had like this jar of blood sitting around, and like whatever they, the rice, like this is all stuff that they probably have on hand. Like this is what they do. And they take their jobs very seriously. And from the film, you can see that, like, hey, like, they're the real deal, even though people probably scrutinize and are suspicious of them all the time. But sometimes I was like, oh, gosh, okay. Okay, the poor chicken. But there's even, like, commentary from characters in the film. I think there's, like, a young girl, and she's, like, the daughter of a shaman, or she's, like, a young shaman. And she even made a commentary of like, do we have to kill the chicken? And the mom's like, but you love chicken. Fried chicken. So it's, it's just one of those things. But I kept wondering also, is the use of the animals, regardless of what they're trying to get, blood, sacrifice, is it because animals are innocent and there's like that connection and that tie and that link? It's really, I'm curious about that. And maybe that's just something where you'd have to dig deeper and find more knowledge about the culture to understand that. But yeah, interesting. And then did I also mention that the grave was not necessarily marked? There was like longitude, latitude numbers, I believe, on it. But I don't think it was marked. I just thought I should say that because that's so creepy. Oh my God. And so basically we're like an hour or so into the film, and basically you think it's over, but it's not. There's more, okay? So the baby lives, we're all successful, they get rid of the terrible grandfather spirit, but not without some tragedy. Some of the family members did indeed die by the hands of that spirit, and the burial guy, the main burial guy, definitely feels guilty about it. The shamans, they took on this huge thing, and they kind of lost. Like, they didn't lose the kid, they saved the kid, but at what cost? A lot of people died. And what, so that they could have money? Like, yeah, it's important, but still, stressful. But the family even says, like, my grandson's alive. We'll still hold up at the end of our bargain. Here's the money. And then we're wiping our hands of this. And basically, there's that. But then, God, and I can't even remember what prompts this burial guy to go back. Okay, so I just had to add this little snippet in.
I remembered why the main burial guy went back to the grave. He went back to find that snake that was now wreaking all this havoc on one of his burial guys who had dug up the body in the first place. So that's what happened. Sorry.
But of course the movie didn't end because of that. So he goes back and he finds another grave. So not only is this gravesite just fucking scary as hell, you still see the foxes over there, but there's another grave and this time he calls a shaman and her guy, and they're all together, kind of like, why the fuck are we doing this? Let's leave it. And they get more freaked out because they already went through all that other shit. But the grave is like standing upward, like vertical. It's not even like, oh my, you guys. When I saw that, I was like, look, I grew up in a Christian household. I'm not judging any religions. I definitely believe in spirits, whatever, teach their own. Sometimes you're just raised into it. You don't know no better. But there are some things where I'm like, hell no. Hell to the no. Leave. What the hell? And it's like this old wood and there's cracks in some of it. And there's like, I don't know if it's barbed wire, but I was like, hell no. It's clear that it's like they're trying to keep the thing inside captured and stuck and not worried about anything else. Like, what the hell? But anyway, they take it out because it's a movie and that's why they take it out. And then they put it in the car and they go to this like temple. I don't know. Is it a temple? I can't remember if that's the correct term. There's a lot of different cultural religions and things going on in this film, but they take it to a guy and he like had some connection because he was asked a few questions by these burial guys about, hey, we heard that the person who originally performed this ceremony, you know, this was his name. And he tells them, well, actually the only person who would have done something like that had this name and it's not the same name as the guy that they were told. So that was suspicious. And then later out they find this other guy was like, he was Japanese and like, the facts are all over the place. And so, again, we're just like all over the place again. And they decide to finish reburying this other spirit or whatever they're going to do with it. I can't even remember. It got so fucking crazy. And anyway, they're like, oh, we'll wait until the morning and this is what they'll do. And they all agree to do that, even though they're all fucking freaked out and you can tell. And all I can think is, you're gonna wait. I just knew some shit was about to go down. I just knew it. And then basically the spirit, like they put, I don't know if it's salt or rice, but they put something around it to try to keep it binded so it can't get out. This spirit rips its way out of the grave and through the roof of the shelter that it was contained in. And the first thing it does is go after the main guy who like owns this temple. He's dead. And this spirit loves to like rip out organs, by the way. It gets real graphic. And anyway, one of the shamans, the guy assistant, he can see spirits and he can be possessed by them. And he has like a nightmare. I would call it a nightmare, but maybe it's a premonition. I don't know. And the spirit is like standing on his stomach. Of the dead guy that just got killed. And I'm just like, oh my god. And he kind of just like wakes up out of it and you can tell he's just like, oh fuck. What happened? You can just tell he's so used to it, which scared me even more. I'm like, what is happening? Oh my god. And long story short, the spirit that is let out is so powerful, so strong. It's like a warrior who thinks he's still in war. He thinks he has to protect this specific spot of, you know, where the grave was. Like, that's his whole thing. He is like this dark presence and entity, like fear, war, violence, revenge, like you name it. This guy's fucking scary. And he's just ravishing everything. Like he's speaking and they start speaking Japanese and They're scared, okay? Like the shaman, this is the first time I've seen her actually be freaked out by something. He fucks up her assistant. I think he tries to rip his organs out. He scares her. She tries to pretend, that she's not human. Then it catches her. Oh, she's scared. He goes around like a giant ball of fire. I can't even remember like what got him to that point, but I do know that her grandma like warned her to not go through with this other burial. Like when your grandmother is coming back from the dead and telling you not to, I think that's a sign to not fucking do it, okay? What the fuck? And that's all I said, like through this whole chaos. What the fuck? What the hell? What am I watching? What's happening? And so after that, oh boy, it's like racking my brain again about all the stuff that happened. But after that, they go and they are able to capture the spirit. The burial guy is like, I'm sure that this specific spot on the longitude, latitude, if we just do all these things and get this, that we will kill the spirit. But then he finds out a little too late that he was wrong. The thing that they had to kill was the spirit and like his armor or something in connection to him. It was on him. It wasn't actually like the ground, but that was just like where his like soul was connected to. And there's like this really old tree around it. And there's like a whole scene of her trying to capture the spirit. It's just wild. And ultimately, and I did skip a lot, but it's just hard to explain. And when you watch the film, you'll know why. But ultimately, they do manage to kill it. And it went from like a team of 4 to a team of 3 because her assistant got so fucked up he was in the hospital and he was possessed. But his body took a toll and they had to bring in the extra shamans and they had to have someone watching the guy while they were out trying to fight this other creature. It's just wild. Like, I can't get over how wild it was. And anyway, they were able to trap this warrior spirit, the end-all be-all crazy warrior spirit who was going around wreaking chaos, that they were on the news. They were talking about how it was a bear attack because it just looked like a bear had ravaged and gone after people, but it was a spirit, okay? And it was just wild. And they get it with a lot of bruises, broken bones later, okay? Literally, it was a fight, okay? There was death, okay? But they succeed, and then you see like, oh, the guy gets to go to his daughter's wedding, the main burial guy, and they definitely have scars. They're probably gonna have trauma about this forever, and you can see it on their faces, but they're happy to be alive. They're all much closer now. Before it just seemed like they had a business relationship and they talked to each other when they had to and they kind of shitted on each other. But now there's like a bond and they're like, much respect. We need some rest. And they just kind of go back into the mundane normalness that is their lives, which isn't very normal at all, but it's normal for them. And I just think that this film deserves a commentary because it's good, but it's absolute chaos. And there's something that South Korea is doing with the horror genre that I just think that everyone needs to start recognizing and giving them their flowers and giving them that spotlight. But I liked it and I was able to enjoy it even with subtitles. But I will say I do want to watch it again to sort of really see what's going on a lot more. Sometimes it's hard to read everything and watch at the same time when there's so much going on and there's so much complexity in the story. But ultimately, I had a great time and I think that you'll enjoy it too. I hope that I convinced you to at least try to watch the film. Again, it is graphic. There's a lot of like spiritual horror going on, but it is a lot more of a horror genre than I think it is a psychological horror. And I did enjoy the film, but again, I think my goal is to always prepare you for what to expect, and then you can apply everything that I've given you, and you know yourself more than anyone else. You'll know if you like it or not. But thank you for listening. Bye.